Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mysteries and Oddities videos. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do one last one here. This one though based on one of your older suggestions. And then this one it will be the last one for this series before I give it a brief rest and then start focusing on another series. In fact, I'll be doing actually 5 videos on new cryptids and monster stuff, mainly because I promised everyone who saw my last live stream while I was there at MGM Park, I played one of those games where it was you take a small sandbag and you kind of toss it into a hole from a distance. Well, I played that game and I promised that if I made it just once as a one in hole shot, then I would make those 5 videos, and sure enough it went in. So be on the lookout for that soon. This particular entry is actually a pretty fascinating one that happens to take place there in Florida. So definitely something that I want to visit one of these days. It sounds so fascinating to go see, especially all the mysteries and the concepts associated with its creation. You might have heard of it before, those of you that live in Florida, but it has to do with a location known as Coral Castle, which you're looking at here. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating info, not just associated with this location, but also, more importantly, with the creator, in this case, of this area and all the mystery surrounding him. So, all right, let's go ahead and let's focus on this particular location. So what is Coral Castle? Well, again, it's an area that you have to go to Florida for, more specifically, what's known as Homestead, Florida. And if you go visit there, to this day, you can visit this location, and for a small fee, I think I saw online it was around $18, you'll be able to see all these wonderful and beautiful rock formations built there on this piece of land. Under most circumstances, these rock formations would be extraordinary on their own, but for this fact, all of this was built by hand, apparently by one man. One single person created all of these objects, and we're talking about very large stones. We'll talk about more in detail in a minute, by hand, and if the legend goes even more accurately, no assistance by anyone else, in the dead of night, using just primitive tools, and how he himself describes it, just leverage. That's how he stated to so many visitors. That's why it's such a mysterious place to this day, because these rocks are not obviously light in terms of weight. These are rocks that to this day, even now, using the most modern technology, it would involve a small crew, and it would involve using the latest type of equipment, heavy equipment, in order to get this done. But no, this was all done by one single person. In fact, let's talk about him right now. So who was this man? His name was Edward Leedskalnin. Hope I'm saying that correctly, Leedskalnin. And he was someone that came from Latvia. The way the story goes was, when he was there in Latvia in the early 1900s, he was apparently shunned by someone that he found, I guess, in a romantic level, some person that he was seeking to make either his wife or his girlfriend or fiance, something along those lines. Although even then, there's various versions about who that mysterious person is, along with various names as well. So when he was shunned by her, he decided to leave for America. Right then and there, he just decided to move. And then almost in an act of defiance, he wanted to showcase to this person what he can do. Maybe it was the fact that she thought he was a nobody, that he was not going to do anything. If you follow those guidelines, then that's when he decided that he's going to create something that'll last the test of time, that'll be known by him as being the creator, and then that was his act of defiance. So he left here for America, and he was traveling around various places. Eventually, though, he had to go to Florida and stay there, because he came under contact with tuberculosis, which was, of course, considered almost a terminal disease back then, although apparently he was also healed on that part too. But there's also some mystery surrounding that, about how that was done. That's the whole basis, basically, of not just him and this location. A lot of things seem to contradict each other when it comes to particular knowledge. So I was looking at various places online for this info, and I saw one place mention something, but then there was also contradicted, or more info was added at another location. So it all just It leads even to more mystery surrounding. There's more left questions rather than answers as to what was occurring. But lo and behold, once he got that diagnosis, he decided to settle at a location first at a place called Florida City. All again, there in Florida, and then that's when he decided to start building this castle. In fact, he first called it Ed's Place. He started building it somewhere in the early 1920s, and he just did so as is by himself. No one ever saw him do this, like, let's say, getting these stones, carving them, moving them to their locations, placing them within certain areas to be pinpoint precise. In fact, let's talk about those stones themselves. Those stones that you're looking at here are, again, not light. In fact, they're at least several tons each, and there's more than about 1,100 of them. They're all just scattered about throughout this very large piece of land. The heaviest stone is apparently about 35 tons, and then they average, if you consider all of them together, around 14 tons each. So we're talking thousands of pounds each single stone. The tallest one, in fact, is about, I think I was reading somewhere around 25 feet tall, and there's two of these giant monoliths, and that just goes to show again the complexity involved with these stones. They're made of a kind of material called ulet, which is almost like a limestone, and they're very porous, in fact. So that made it a little easier to carve them, but still, in this case, 1920s technology, using just one person, and if you go by the legend, it was just him doing it in moonlight, which is more actually fact than legend, because no one apparently saw him do this throughout the day. He would literally do this at night. That's how private he was. He wanted no one to know how he was doing this, at least during his creation. And then once it was finished, he would gladly showcase it to everyone around. But that's at least how it went for that time period. But cut to a couple years later, after he first started, apparently he became aware that the piece of land around him, which he purposely bought was for its privacy, and in order for him to do this monumental task, well, this piece of land was going to have some residential property coming forward soon. So he decided to get another piece of land about 10 miles away, and then that became the permanent home of these locations. So he actually had to do a second time, like a second trip of sorts, for this stuff. This now is going to a place called Homestead, Florida, and people saw these giant objects, all these stones, and they were placed on trucks, and then they were moved. It's not like he moved it himself, those 10 miles, but what still perplexed people was the fact that how did he get them on those trucks? There were no giant cranes that he was using that were visible. There was nothing else in terms of any other help as well from other parties. So somewhere he was doing all of this on his own, not just creating these stones, like carving them and getting the pinpoint precise precision associated with them. In fact, it's so precise that these stones, when they're actually interlocked together, they're so precisioned that they allow no light to go between them when you look at the crevices. So any sunlight directly streaming, hitting that rock, and there's like a corner or a crevice, no sunlight pierced through it. It's exactly like anything involving the Great Pyramids of Egypt and the pinpoint precision that they have as well. And on top of that, these stones all showcase their own features to interlock between each other, so that way they don't have really anything holding them together other than their own precise weight and the angles associated with them. That's the kind of math that he was using as well when it came to these creations. So he moved them all 10 miles over to this new location, and then he could just continue building it for the next decade. It finished, I think I was reading, somewhere around 1936, although he still continued to add more and more stuff as he was doing so. I think it went into the 1940s. And then during this time, that's when he was able to open it and then start getting people inside into it. The way the story goes, based on various articles I was reading, he was getting people in for 10 cents, but sometimes if they didn't have money, then they could come in on their own. But then he upped it to 25 cents, and that's how he made part of his living as well. I was trying to find out exactly, like, when he got all this land, and then he got in this case the materials, like where he got all the money for this originally. I couldn't find anything up front. But if anyone has any more info on that, please post it in the comments below. But either way, though, he was making his living now through this. He also apparently had a very strong mindset when it comes to certain things. Like, he was selling pamphlets as well, showcasing like that match what he thought, like when it came to the creation of these stones and how one person can do this on their own. He kind of sold that into a pamphlet, and he was making some of that money too. His opinion was so strong in it, in fact, that in some parts apparently he was very much so lobbying against certain people not being able to vote. Like, if you were poor or if you were weak-minded, however that was considered, however that was rated, then you were not, in his opinion, allowed to vote, because he didn't want to have anyone that would not have a strong will, a strong mind to be able to influence others. But that's just how he thought. That's how he came to his mindset. If he could do all this on his own, again, almost as an act of defiance, then he expected others to be able to do the same. And he continued this for a little while. Unfortunately, though, it looks like time eventually caught up to this man, and he was diagnosed with some kind of kidney disease. And then when that happened, he ended up passing away shortly afterward. I believe it was in the 1950s that he ended up passing away. And the way the story goes afterward, he was able to then there was some cousin of his that lived in Illinois that became the only other family member of his, apparently, that had this castle given to him just by the estate. And then afterward, it was sold to a company, and then it exists to this day as is. I think there was one other party before that company, but still, it became sold to an organization called Coral Castle Inc. And then to this day, that's how it stayed as is, under a National Registry of Historic Places as well. But otherwise, that's the history, at least, associated with this Coral Castle, all created by this guy, Mr. Lead Skalnin, who ended up dying again at the age of 64. And even then, I think it was about 28 days before he ended up passing away, he was still there, just putting up stuff in front of his castle. In fact, the very last time he was there was around 1951 in November. He put up a sign on front of the gate that said, "Go into the hospital." And then that was it. That was the last time that he was pretty much at that location. But very fascinating story. No, all the history associated with it. How did this happen? How did he create on this? There's various legends as well, according to people that read, go into heavy detail on this. There's the idea that maybe he was creating this because, according to some neighbors, he was using it for singing. Apparently, they saw him. They're the only witnesses. They saw him place his hands on the stone, and he was singing to each stone, and somehow these stones were then able to levitate off the ground. That's one legend. Another one is he had some kind of weird telekinetic power, something that he could use his mind to move things, but of course that's even more far-fetched. All in all, anytime anyone asked him, anyone said, "Hey, Mr. Litzkelin, how did you do this? How were you able to create this?" All these people that visited his tourist attraction, he always said the same thing. He used leverage and gravity, and he used the Egyptians as the model for this, and that's it. He also had some magnets too. If you wanted to get a good hint, though, as to how he was able to make things at least work some way, there was a popular that still is there, but there's a gate there at the front that's made out of completely one giant slab of rock. It's so built precisely that you could use your finger to gently push it open, to slide it open as is. Eventually, though, the gate stopped, like it stopped working. And so when it was inspected, it was found that he had used a giant pole that was drilled inside the middle of the stone, and then it was placed on some kind of some kind of bearing associated with a part from a car, and then that's when that thing rusted. That's essentially why it stopped working afterward. But it gives you an idea how he was using leverage, as he stated, in order to do something along those lines. But quite fascinating. No, Coral Castle, mysterious place, not just from the owner, but how it was created. No clear answers as to, again, the origin of it, and even how it was used and moved, not just created at one place, but then moved to another. All still answers that beg to be finalized, but we may never know what they are. But if anyone has been there, if anyone has any more info, anything else might have missed, please post those comments below. All right, everyone. Thanks again as always. Take care.